Hello, EnderSword here again, this time with another Bronze League replay. We're going to be looking at the Zerg player here, Recklessness, and we're going to see that during this game that is a very, very appropriate name for our player to be using. Up here in the top right-hand corner is the Protoss player SeaR, and he's going to be our enemy for today. We're on Tal'darim altar, so pretty big map. We're going to see a bit of a long game here, obviously. I don't have like a little cover for the timer thing. I'm not really all about suspense or anything. I'm just trying to tell people what I see and what they can improve on and so on. So in this game, the top three things that we're going to look at are pretty much in every bronze game. I'm going to look at macro, macro, macro. I'm getting a little more all-encompassing with what I consider macro to be, and in this case it's going to be larva injects, making units, making sure that you're expanding well, making sure that you're droning up properly, and so on. We're also going to be looking at scouting and creep spread, which I now am also increasingly putting together. A lot of Zerg players really need to wrap their head around the idea that creep spread is not only great for your army movement and everything, but it is an incredible scouting tool. Just gives you vision of so much of the map, particularly in a long game like this, and it's just something that you can't do without. Particularly if you have bases that aren't connected with creep and everything like that. So that's just something you want to be focusing on as well. I think my volume's down, so I'm going to turn that up. The other thing that we're going to look at in this one, which is a little more unique, is the concept of base races. So how do you deal with a base race situation, in this case as a Zerg player? What sort of target should you be prioritizing, and what should you be doing on your end to make sure that you're getting ahead and staying ahead? Maybe when you are outgunned a little bit, but you have the greater mobility, as is often the case for a Zerg in a base race. They tend to have the faster, easier to move army, but they're often outgunned, so they can't actually just go right at the other army, or else they probably would. If you are a Zerg player and you've got the bigger force, usually the other guys can't get away from you, particularly if it's a Protoss. So what do we do in that type of situation? And we'll take a peek into that. So we can see a pretty normal thing going on here. He did go for the fast expand before getting the spawning pool down, and does pull some drones off towards that expansion. One thing that I've read lately, I haven't really played with the numbers, but intuitively it does make sense, is a lot of people are starting to endorse the concept of not pulling any additional drones over to the other base until you are above 16. So very often in the past people would say split some of your workers off to go to a quick expansion. But it now sounds like people are suggesting just leaving stuff at your original, provided it's not more than 16, and just rallying everything else over to the other place. That way you're not losing a lot of mineral mining up front, but instead you're going to lose a little bit at a time as they transfer over. And it's better to do that later on than it is to pull 6 guys off the line right up front and send them over. Small difference, but it's the type of thing that can add up to a higher league player, I suppose. If you're in bronze, don't worry about it. And he did have quite a few drones there anyway, so he may have, didn't really count, but he may have been at or about 16 regardless. So the Zerglings come out, and he does move them up. Obviously, we should be doing this, moving them up to try and get some scouting information, taking a peek around and everything. But he doesn't really spread out, doesn't really move them into strategic locations. You do want to be maybe putting one at this tower, one at this tower. There's no reason to really move the 4 around in a weird little group like this. You want to be taking a look at this area, taking a poke at the front to see kind of what is getting made there, keeping an eye down here to see if he's sneaking a third, anything like that. You've got these units early, so you might as well just be using them to get as much information as you possibly can. So just parking them there for a long period of time isn't really helping much. It's also very late, and he hasn't actually started with any speed on the Zerglings yet, nor has he actually gone for any other tech. So it's not that he plans on actually skipping it. It was just really, really late to come out there. So that's such a key upgrade. Make sure that you never forget that. If you aren't intentionally skipping that to rush to something else, which is something that you're rarely going to do anyway, you do want to be getting that upgrade as soon as possible, particularly when you do have the money for it. If the Protoss player was going for some sort of multi-gate play and a strong push against you, you just need that speed. It just doesn't work if you've got the slow lings. And you can see there was a fairly beefy Protoss army there. If he had decided to be aggressive with this, there's not really a lot going on that can support that, given that the lings are currently slow. The one spine crawler probably wouldn't have been enough to hold, say, a 4 or 5 gate push there when you've got the lings that just don't have the ability to charge up surround or anything like that. We don't have creep connected between these two bases yet. It will be done there because the creep tomb are down now, but again, in about 9 minutes, it is a bit late to be connecting that. Again, just now getting speed, that sort of thing can slow you down a lot. One thing that I see very, very commonly in Bronze and Silver League games is a lot of a reliance on this hidden expansion sort of thing. You're basically playing off the fact that you don't think your low-level opponent is going to scout for it. And you're usually right that they're not going to be scouting for it. However, while it will win you a lot of games at that level, in the long run you may be doing yourself a disservice, because you're going to be used to a 2 or 3 base economy that doesn't rely on a normal 2 or 3 base defense, and you're kind of just leaving it to chance that they won't actually scout it. And once you get a little bit higher and you start facing people that will routinely scout these things, then you may find yourself falling off quite a bit because you're used to getting this free base up that had no real liability attached to it. But when it gets spotted, it's so vulnerable, there's really no way that he could get over there in time to actually stop it from being sacked, and you're just going to lose that type of thing. So you can do it now and then. I'm not saying don't do it at all, and it certainly will give you a few wins. It's something that you do want to know how to put into your game, and you do see high-level players, even professional players, do it on occasion, but they usually know when they've created a situation in which it's unlikely to be scouted. They know how to fake not having it and not really tip anyone off that maybe there's extra income. They'll tend to do it when they're hiding extra production or hiding another technology that doesn't seem to be missing because they don't seem like they should be able to afford it or something of that nature. So just do it if you like to do it, but don't use it as a crutch. Don't get addicted to this sort of that sort of thing. At this point, definitely some technology should be coming up where 12 minutes into the game, it's quite possible for the Protoss at this point to have, well, Archons, which he does have, possible for him to have Colossi out, a pretty decent gateway army, things like that, and you're just not going to do all that great with just lings this late into the game. You do see a lot of that early, say before the 10-minute mark, and it is good to have a just ling swarm on an open map like this. It can prevent a lot of movement, can prevent the Protoss player from coming out of their base. But when you've then, at 12, 13 minutes, got just lings and then just mutalisks, this army can't actually withstand any form of head-on attack. The lings are really only good if supported by something, or they can catch something out in the open, really get a good surround on it. But against anything a bit beefy, it's not going to work. And the same really goes for the Mutalisks. They're meant as a harassment unit. They lose a lot of effectiveness when they're going to be put into a situation of actually tackling an army head-on. So building up to, I guess, 15 Mutalisks here, again, since this is such a big harassment thing, really when you get that first handful out, you need to be going out into the base and start doing that harassment. If he had been a little more proactive with the harassment, he could have actually prevented this push from the Protoss player, because he would have known, oh, I can't leave my base right now because I'm just going to lose everything to this whole flock of Mutalisks, and he would never actually make it down here to really know what's going on. But instead, we've got a pretty bad engagement where a bunch of Lings ran in first, got cut down a lot, then the Mutalisks came in and joined, and just everything about this army was designed to absolutely destroy that. You've got enough Zealots and Archons going around to completely pick apart the Lings coming in. You can never really get a good surround on the Archons. And then when those Mutalisks come in and try and target them down, that Archon splash damage just does so much, particularly coupled with the Sentry Guardian Shield and the Stalkers to add to their fire. So just an army that was probably worth a lot more, but definitely worth a lot more. That was a lot of Mutalisks, but just absolutely destroyed because of the composition, because it was never meant to just go head-to-head. If these roaches were here a little earlier to actually provide some meat to that, so that it could occupy some of the ground units, so that the mutas could come in and do damage without being picked off, that would be a little better. So just a bit slower there. Do you see, obviously, the Protoss player is coming in with the massive amount of DTs. That's definitely something that you do want to be prepared for as a Zerg player. You really don't want to be going without any form of detection at all. Sometimes it's going to slip your mind that you just kind of forgot to get it, or it didn't seem like the player was going for that. But in this case, particularly where he saw Archons, he knows that the tech is at most one little step away from the DTs, and that's such a good follow-up, usually not in this mass, but when he knows that there's no detection here. He's had the observer in the area, knows there's no spore crawlers, hasn't seen an overseer, anything like that, so he was able to come in with the DTs up front, and I didn't focus on it, but during this main battle also did a drop of 5 Zealots in the main base with this Warp Prism. So using distraction up front and just taking advantage of a lot of weaknesses which he's scouted in the Zerg army. So he knows exactly what he's taking advantage of. It's not just a random, I'm going to go DTs and let's see if he has detection. He was in here, around here enough to know and see that, no, there isn't any. That I know that there's not detection. I know that there's not anything back here. He knew that that was going to be something that worked, so what seemed like a really large investment, which probably was too much, that was like 8 DTs or something, more than that even. 8 DTs. That is quite expensive, but he's always going to be able to morph these into Archons later, which is pretty much right in the tech path that he's going, so it is a fairly sound decision to do based on the information that he has. On the other hand, Recklessness doesn't even know if there's an expansion yet. He probably assumes there is, but he's not really sure what's going on there. He's never checked into this third. We don't know when these things are coming up. If he was a little more proactive in his scouting right now, he could probably still, with this army, which you wouldn't want to go head-to-head with still at this point, still do enough harassment on this third to prevent it from ever going up. So this late in the game, the main is basically mined out. He could still reduce Protoss to a single base economy just by harassing the third, as opposed to, again, making a fairly faulty engagement, throwing all the Lings in first to die, before bringing the roaches in from behind, allowing them to be dealt with one wave at a time. And just getting pulled apart. You don't want to just be engaging directly head-on, particularly up a ramp, against units like these that have pretty beefy cover while doing a lot of splash damage behind it. It's just not something that you're going to win a lot of the time. If you're not getting a good surround on these things, if you're not having a lot of distracting units that are splitting up their fire and focus, then you're not going to be able to focus these Archons down efficiently enough to actually do any damage to that army. And it was just before these Colossus came out that would have made it look like an absolute joke during that engagement. So the third does come up, and even with 4 bases now, the Zerg player is a bit at a loss of what do I do. It does seem hard at this point to completely remax up to another actual beefy ground army that could come against this sort of thing. This is a pretty hard thing to stop right now because this is a lot of money's worth of stuff. The Archons have been allowed to just build up. They've done a lot of damage and been reused over and over. They have double-digit kills on a lot of them. And the Colossus are now coming into play with a lot of Stalker backup. It's hard to take a look at this and say, well, this is the type of composition that's going to attack this. You really need a lot of different unit types at this point, and that's just not a luxury that the Zerg has at this moment because he hasn't been teching up to different things and hasn't been taking advantage of a lot of upgrades, hasn't been transitioning to, say, Broodlords, hasn't gotten Infestors, hasn't transitioned to a Hive. So you do want to be constantly keeping that up throughout the game. Never get stuck on a tech. Always be transitioning to the next thing. Always be scouting and always be moving on to what's going to respond to what they are doing. So at this point again, we've just gone back into Mass Muna, which is again a complete harassment tool, but his first instinct when seeing the army comes in is to withdraw to his own bases. He does now decide, yeah, okay, I've got to go counterattack, but again, just a bit of a slow reaction. He let way too many of these actually build up before making this decisive move out. If he had just built a few and then started harassing around the perimeter, it's likely that he could have actually prevented this push from ever occurring because the Protoss would have been a lot more hesitant to leave his base in the first place if he knew that there were like 25 Mutalisks that would just do a counterattack immediately. So it is something that you do actually want to show. A lot of strategies are based on, I'm going to mass it up and then make this really big sneak attack, or like, he won't know that I switched to this and I'm going to go attack. Mutalisks aren't really like that. It's the type of unit that actually forces your opponent to stay at home, forces them to defend themselves. If they don't defend themselves, yeah, they do a ton of damage. Like here, they're just walking through the base because he's not defending himself. But he was already kind of committed. He has to take these things out and completely takes out the tech. But just as earlier in the game we saw, when, say, 5-6 Mutalisks came out, if you go and attack the base and start harassing mineral lines right then, the first attack probably never even happens. He would not be confident enough to leave his own base at that point in the game. Here again, instead of getting to 20-plus Mutalisks, if he had just gone with the first 8 and started harassing the perimeter of these 3 bases, is he really going to walk this entire army across the map? Probably not. At the very worst, he's at least got to split it to leave some at home to do some coverage. And this is a hard area to cover. There's a lot of gaps that aren't easily defended against air units. There's no indication that he had blink. We haven't seen any blinking going on, and it isn't something that he has. So it would be quite hard for him to actually stop this. And even at this point, with the Protoss player having an absolutely massive army lead, it's hard to stop these Mutalisks. It's actually very difficult to win a base race situation when what you're fighting is Mutalisks. But there is a big blunder there. He tried to see if he could focus down that Nexus in time, but no, you just can't even allow a second or two worth of engagement when this is the type of army that you're up against. Just the splash damage from those Archons is so deadly, and you can't afford to let the Mutalisks drop below kind of a critical mass type number, and he does lose a couple more there just due to well, bad control basically, and flying into an area that he didn't really know was safe. You do want to be staying out in the outskirts and keeping yourself safe. So unfortunately now the number has kind of dropped well below that critical mass, swoop in, do an instant damage and leave point. So that's obviously not a good thing. Back at home, which is now our surrogate home, we've got a spawning pool down, but he's building another one. He is putting up other hatcheries throughout the map. He's going to lose this base here. He didn't really rally these Mutalisks back to the other part, so he will just kind of lose everything here. As soon as he lost all his tech here, that has to basically immediately be rebuilt. You can't afford any gap in which, oh, my spawning pool's gone and my lair's gone and my spire's gone. You're just not producing anything whatsoever, and there's no point in the face of this army to making lings or roaches or hydras or something. You're not going to win any sort of grand battle against this. When you've entered into this situation, you are clearly now in a base race situation. The only way that you can possibly win is to somehow, and the Protoss would have to absolutely epically fail, but is to somehow get back to a critical number of Mutalisks, spend all this money on them, get to like 25, 30 again, and just get them out and see what you can pick apart. We have basically crippled the Protoss's economy, so he's not going to be building really a lot more. The only thing he's got left is his reserves, and his supply has been crippled enough that he's going to have to build a bunch of pylons before he can even do that. So you can certainly be picking off pylons at a rate that tries to stay ahead of his replacement rate. But it's just not going to happen if you're going to kind of delay tech, not really get it up. Roach Warren here to be rebuilt doesn't make any sense. What's the plan here? With the 3 shattered bases I have, I'm going to make the, I'd say you need about 200 roaches to kill that army. Like, that is pretty much the... If you told me, yeah, I think my opponent's going roaches, this is what I would make. So that doesn't make any sense to actually... He knows this is the composition. It's the only thing it can be at this point, and that's virtually one of the worst things that he could do into it. So you've really got to stick to the air, make sure that this harassment is going on. Finally, the Protoss does clue in, oh, I'm allowed to split my army into 2 pieces, and I can keep a component back at home. And that's ultimately what he does do here. And again, the Mutalisks just kind of sit, trying to pick things off and allow that direct engagement to go on. So the Protoss will finally find all the other bases and end it. So to recap kind of everything there, one is creep. Look at how late it is in the game. The creep has never really left the actual base area themselves. The only real creep tumors that were put down were to connect the main and the natural, and I believe there was one around this area to give just to the bottom of this ramp where he's planted a spine crawler. You definitely want to be advancing that as far as possible. There's no reason that, say, 15, 20 minutes into the game, your creep is not out to these watchtowers. And you've just got so much control, you've got so much vision on the map that the Protoss player just cannot move out onto the map without you knowing everything about it. The warp prism that came in from the back could easily be spotted by the creep. He's not going to go all the way around here without losing a lot of time. Just getting those creep tubers out really helps out, especially if you then cover this sort of area. You're going to know when something's clear. You're going to know when you can safely take that expansion. I do encourage taking your natural third, getting used to the idea of taking your actual natural, taking your third that is the one that you're kind of quote-unquote supposed to take, as opposed to getting a little too used to taking these ninja expansions. So don't get addicted to it. Work it into your play. Know how to do it. Know when you can get away with it. Obviously, you do want to know that, but you can't get away with it every game, and particularly as you're going to rise in level, that will get harder. And overall, just know what you're responding to. If you're going to make a harassment unit, you have to go harass with them. And very often, lower league players will make a unit that's meant for harassment, but they know a couple times when they held back and didn't just immediately harass with it, that they just won the game. And they'll start to think, well, that's what I'll do again, that's what I'll do again. But again, as you climb up through the ranks a little bit, that's going to work less and less. There's a lot of people, probably Zerg players certainly have done this with Mutalisks. There's tons of Terrans that have done this with Banshees that are just like, I'm going to hide my Banshee tech and I'm going to get cloaked, but I'm not going to go in with the first 1 or 2. I'm going to wait until I have 8, and then if I totally surprise them, I just win the game. That's not what you should be doing, because you're not going to surprise everyone. You want to start using the units a little bit in a way that you're going to have to once people know what they're doing a little bit. And it's not going to take that long. I mean, by silver or gold even, people are going to have the detection by the time you've got your 5th Banshee out, or they're going to have anti-air by the time you've got your 20th Mutalisk out. But if you go with your first one, if you go with your 5th and 6th Mutalisks, you're going to catch some people off guard a lot more. And even if you don't catch them completely off guard, even someone that's really prepared for one of those two things can have a hard time dealing with it. It's hard to stop Mutalisks, period. It's not an easy thing to do. And very often you then distract them long enough that you do get your 16th out. As you're accumulating them, as they're trying to deal with it and they're all distracted, you're disrupting their economy. Now you can be building more and finally hit that critical mass, or you can switch into something else, or you can do whatever you want. But it puts you more in the driver's seat as opposed to you just trying to seize on the fact that, oh, maybe they're not ready for this. Well, maybe they're not, but they could be. And particularly when you don't scout anything, you don't really know, so it's not a good gamble to be going with. So try not to comprise an army entirely of something that can't stand up if they just come and attack you. So overall, that was really the key to the game. I think Mutalisks were what won and lost the game. You could have easily won and held the Protoss in the base at 2 different points during the game. Could have potentially won a base trade situation, given how long it took the Protoss to realize they could split their army up. But again, just some blunders with the Mutalisks did make the difference here. And this is a long enough game already, so I'm going to cut it off there. But I thought that was a fairly cute one, an interesting one, so I thought we'd go over it. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, I hope that